Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and I'll be your guide on this journey from consciousness to cluelessness and back around again. Today on the podcast, I talk to Nischa Heron Phair. Nischa is an author, researcher, and trauma-informed sex educator. She works almost exclusively with female survivors and those recovering from unhealthy relationships to help them reclaim a nourishing, authentic, and soulfully aligned relationship to pleasure that supports them to live purposely in every area of their lives. Her book, Fawn, When No Looks Like Yes, is the first book to ever be written in the context of sex and consent. In addition to sounding the alarm, Phair attempts to answer the million-dollar question: how can sex and intimacy thrive in a post-metoo, post-pandemic reality? Here we go! This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Is there something interfering with your happiness or is preventing you from achieving your goals? By now, you all know that therapy is an important part of my own self-care. It has truly been a game changer in every aspect of my life, including achieving goals. BetterHelp is the largest online therapy platform worldwide. They are changing the way people get help with facing life's challenges by providing convenient, discreet, and affordable access to a licensed therapist. BetterHelp makes professional therapy available anytime, anywhere, through a computer, tablet, or smartphone. You can start communicating within 48 hours. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional therapy done securely online. And I have a special offer for Consciously Clueless listeners. Visit betterhelp.com/Carly and join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. By using this code, you get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/CARLY. Take care of yourself today. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast. Well, thank you again for joining me. I'm really, really excited to chat with you this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So the podcast is called Consciously Clueless, and that is to express this journey that I've been on of wanting to find ways to be more conscious and feeling like I've got it. I figured it out. This is the thing. And then those moments where life is like, don't get too comfortable and I'm just clueless all over again, and just kind of that journey. So I like asking guests, where are you on a spectrum of clueless to consciousness right now in this moment?
I try to stay as clueless as possible as a rule.
Love that answer.
I think that being in the not knowing is the most fertile place for growth and for connections and synchronicities. And I just finished writing my first book, and it's funny. People say, you write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't say is that in writing what you know, you'll write what you need to learn.
Ooh.
Right? And in that process, I'm sure we'll talk about it today, but I really have come to this place where I have no idea what sex and intimacy even is anymore. And in a really beautiful kind of curious way, where I've really let go of all expectations.
Yeah.
And have come to a place where, I can be really happy being clueless and being in the not knowing around sex and intimacy. I think one of the things that I really push back on and work on with my clients is this experience of sexual perfectionism and the pressure we have to perform femininity or masculinity, to perform a certain expectation of what our sexuality is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I really have come to not have any obligation to meet after this process. And it's something I encourage other people to push back against as well. So yes, as clueless as possible.
I love that. I really love that. Should I change the name as clueless as possible of the podcast? So let's start with the beginning. What is it that you do? You talked, you alluded to it a little bit, sex and intimacy. You wrote your first book. So give us the overview.
So I've been an embodiment coach for about 14 years now, and it was 2016. So I guess about 5 years ago, I shifted into the pleasure an intimacy space when I was recovering from an abusive relationship. And so that's mainly what I focus on. I work with a lot of women who've experienced any range of unhealthy experiences in sex and dating. So that can range from, and relationships on the whole. So that could range from early childhood trauma to shady dating practices to, full-blown abusive relationships. So, the one thing that we don't really talk about around unhealthy dating experiences and relationships is the assault that it makes on our sexuality and on our sensuality, on our ability to be in our bodies safely, and our ability to experience things that feel good and be open to aliveness, to possibility in the world. That shut down experience is so protective. So that's really what I focus on with folks. We do a lot of repatterning. I do a lot of movement and proprioception work, as well as a lot of work around repatterning the voice around sex and intimacy. So I'm going to actually just leave that because I feel like I just said a lot.
Oh, that's great. I was like, yes. So tell us then about the book that you just recently, congratulations, your first book. That's amazing.
Thank you. So the book is called Fawn, When No Looks Like Yes. And it's a real deep dive into the stress response of fawning. So fawning is one of our many stress responses, like fight, flight, freeze, flop, faint. So I want to back up for a second and just note that all of our stress responses are purposeful. They all have a reason. They help us survive. Fight, flight is really great for getting us across the street when there's oncoming cars, but it's also really great for helping us feel motivated. And that little bit of a little bit of an edge can help us accomplish goals and, get our errands done. And, right. So it's when those stress responses are repeated daily, hourly, and they become patterns and then become more reinforced, they can start to be really damaging for our health, our well-being, and our relationships. So fawning is part of the tend and befriend response, which was only just discovered 20 years ago. And it's the response that's most common, the stress response that women, people in female bodies, tend to gravitate towards, both for cultural conditioning reasons, but also for biological and hormonal reasons. So tend and befriend is like what we're doing right now, having a conversation, getting to hear each other and respond to one another's nice tones of voice and friendly conversation. But when that response becomes, again, repeated over time, or when we're using it in a situation where it's not safe for us to be our authentic selves, or we're in a relationship where our partner isn't seeing us or isn't listening to our concerns, then again, it can become really damaging. And the really tricky part is that where intimacy and sex especially is concerned, we connect most readily with people when we're in a safe, what I call parasympathetic ground. So a really nice, available body attitude. And when we're in these stress responses, we can't, it represses our awareness, our anger and our fear and all of our emotions and boundaries. So we can't be our authentic selves when we're running these stress responses. So that's a bit of background to talk about the book. And the book really goes into detail around how women especially are often, we're conditioned partly by what people are to behave certain ways in relationship to men, and behave certain ways in regards to our sexuality. And many people end up performing their experience of sex and pleasure either because they don't feel safe to express themselves authentically, or because no one ever told them that they were allowed to.
Or they don't even know what that authenticity is.
Exactly. Because we're being fed this story about, this is what sex is.
Right. From porn, from society, from,
even social media, it's wonderful that we have all of these sex educators that are doing great work, but we're still getting this idea that, okay, so this is the right way, as opposed to being is it the right way for me? know? So yeah, that's what the book is about.
That's amazing. So it sounds like the book came out of you processing through your, not only your embodiment coaching work, but out of your own experience. Is that correct?
It did. Well, so out of the 5 years ago, when I started shifting into this work, I've started focusing on clients who were having similar experiences, and no one was talking about this at the time. And so the big sort of the resounding comment that I get from my clients is, I had no idea this was a thing. I thought I just hated sex with him.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like I'm normal.
Yeah.
Right. So the book really came out of my own personal experience, plus what I, researched with clients and on my own professionally. So.
Well, it sounds pretty amazing in the sense that you were able to take something traumatic and something that you worked through and turn it into your work and this product. How were you able to process through that?
I have a real kind of trust the process approach to life. I'm really okay with not doing things the right way.
Yeah.
So, again, in terms of being like comfortably clueless, that was really a big part of the process, and just trusting that this doesn't make sense and nobody is, confirming that what I'm feeling is accurate. But at the same time, I have all of these other people who are confirming to me that there are many of us having the same experience. So it was really a kind of combination of me deep diving in my own work and coming back to what was happening with my clients. And then, of course, what the research tells us. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what is, if you had to give a definition for listeners, what is authentic sexuality?
Authentic sexuality it's a process. It's not a defined destination that you reach. And it's for me, and what I try to encourage my clients is that it's a daily changing, as subject to shifts as any other part of ourselves are. So one of the concepts I work with in trying to help people uncover their authentic sexuality is the idea of choiceful rebellion. And taking some time to really be intentional about what you push back against in terms of sex and intimacy. So where am I doing something because I just want to get it over with? Or where am I, going along with something to keep the relationship alive instead of honoring my voice, honoring what feels authentic to me?
Yeah.
And so between the pushing back against those things that don't feel authentic and really getting closer to what's true on a body level, that's really how we come to understanding what our authentic sexuality is. So it's sex positivity, but on a more psycho-emotional, spiritual level. So it really does entail all parts of self.
I'm imagining, as you're working with people to work kind of towards this journey of authentic sexuality, how does finding out about your authentic sexuality influence other pieces of your life?
Oh my gosh, I love this question.
Good.
Oh, like you just hit the nail on the head. So another piece with authentic sexuality and just understanding your authenticity on a whole, authenticity isn't this kind of nice to have. It's not some hashtag trendy little thing that, you put on a sticker. Authenticity is a survival need. So when I don't feel safe to be my authentic self, whether it's in bed or when I'm making dinner,
right,
I will necessarily present an altered version to my partner and to the world because I'm trying to protect my authentic self. So if I don't feel safe to be my authentic self, I will automatically just repress who I am at a core level. So safety is the real foundation for all of this. Somatic, intellectual, psycho-emotional, cultural safety, which is really hard to achieve in But the beauty of coming to and really deep diving into your authentic sexuality, because sex and intimacy is so repressed,
right,
is that when we work on these aspects in the bedroom, we take them everywhere in the rest of our lives, because we don't have, like, I don't have a different body when I'm having sex with someone than when I'm writing.
Right.
So anything that I do on that level, and because sex and pleasure is so much more, how should I say, we are intimately and unavoidably connected to our aliveness when we're in experiences of sex and pleasure. Right? So the more that I can occupy that space and allow it to bleed into the rest of my life, the more I'm living in that place of authentic aliveness day to day. And I want to say too that, you know, one thing I really try to focus on is that pleasure isn't just about sex. You know, I use the concept of coming into your pleasure body. So I can do my pleasure body when I'm forest bathing, when I'm walking my dog or snuggling her. And I can be in my pleasure body when I'm having a super duper awesome orgasm.
Right.
So it's really about taking down the walls and decompartmentalizing how we understand our experiences of pleasure.
Because we think of them, just like many other things, we think of them as all these separate columns. Like, this is my physical body. This is my, like, you know, we think about like physical health and mental health. And I'm guessing then, like, you know, maybe spiritual health and sexual health as if it is a separate pillar. And I think what you're getting at is that that's just not true.
No. And I think that the reason that I see working on sex and pleasure work as a kind of umbrella. It's kind of like, I'm really big on doing whatever work is going to get to the root of all of the issues as quickly as possible. So it's like it's kind of a lazy way in a way, but it's more effective. And the thing is, when we're in our pleasure bodies and when we're having sex or being intimate with another person, we're in our physical selves, we're in our spiritual selves, our psycho-emotional selves, we're in our history, our relational history. So it's really a way of being in more of who we are by working in this way. So, and it's because it's an area that's so repressed, it's really phenomenal the amount of stuff that can come up when we're starting to go down this road and come into this process.
So you mentioned that idea of, you know, where these ideas come from, like where are we learning how, or what messages are we receiving that are telling us to suppress this authenticity, and whether that's, you know, the patriarchy is what I threw out, and all these other places. It sounds like we're talking about heterosexual relationships. And I'm curious what like work maybe you've done with, because we're all affected by those systems and how that can show up in other relationships and in authenticity.
Yeah. So most of my clients, well, let me say all of my clients have been people in female bodies who have sex with men. So whether they're non-binary, cisgender, pan, bi, or straight, those are the folks that I have been working with. So the issue, because I focus mostly on fawning and performing, and fawning is a uniquely hierarchical stress response.
Can you say more about that?
Yes. So we only fawn in relation to other people. We don't fawn when there's an oncoming car, when there's a falling tree branch. It's a uniquely relational stress response. So, and this happens like, you know, in what we have something called social fawning as well. So where people will in groups, hang on, let me backtrack. What's a great example for this? So a good example for social fawning is women who may have learned that hating on their own gender affords them a certain amount of protection or safety or being viewed favorably by men inside the patriarchal complex. So anytime we have these hierarchies, we're going to see fawning and performing. So it doesn't matter whether it's a heterosexual relationship or a same-sex relationship. This is going to be at play. I talk about male-female pairs because that's where you automatically have that hierarchical dynamic that you can't escape.
Interesting.
Right. So yes, you can have, two men in a relationship and one maybe more, dominant or controlling, which would create an issue of a hierarchical imbalance. So without question, anyone who's human, animals even do it. This is a mammalian thing. So animals want to, but in most of my work, I do focus on instances of male-female pairs because that's where the most trouble is happening.
So to me, what I'm hearing is, and maybe this is just my advocate, I worked for years as an advocate for survivors of sexual and dating trauma. And so maybe this is just like my advocate brain coming back, but what I'm hearing is power. So really about fawning relationships is about a power imbalance between two people or between a person and a group. Is that kind of what we're getting at?
100%. Yeah. And this is why it's tricky, because even healthy relationships, there can be fawning in those relationships because there's this inherent gender dynamic. So it can be really tricky to unpack.
Can you give some examples? Like, what does fawning look like? So people are like, I think I get the concept. I'm understanding now for listeners, but what would that look like? I'm having a hard time, conceptualizing that.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for asking that. So fawning can look like people pleasing. It can look like going along with something that you don't really want to do, just to keep the peace, not rock the boat. Another one is avoiding talking about your concerns in a relationship because you don't want to seem extra or needy. Right?
Yes.
Right here.
Raising our hands.
Like all of these things, there's in the book, I have about a 2-page long list of all of the examples of fawning. Another one that's really tricky for folks is when you're in a relationship and you allow their turn-ons to become your turn-ons because it's just easier that way.
Ooh.
Right. And that's tricky because we end up training our arousal system to be turned on by something that isn't actually authentic to us. So there's a whole physiological process of needing to detrain our bodies to stop reacting to things that maybe we're not interested in being turned on by. And that happens for men too,
Wow. Wow. The rewiring of what we even find pleasurable is wild. You're kind of blowing my mind right now.
Yeah. Do you want me to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I do.
So here's an example. And I mean, first I want to say because I'm a big no judgment person.
Yes.
We can be turned on by something. So let's use an example like choking. So I can be turned on by choking because I like the feeling of it, the feeling of containment it gives me. And that's all the reason I need to enjoy it.
Right.
I can be turned on by it because the first time it happened to me, my partner didn't ask for my consent, and my body had a physiological stress response, because let's not forget that lubrication and arousal can be triggered through stress and trauma.
Yep.
These are physiological responses that don't necessarily need an emotional consent related factor in order to be triggered. So when we're starting to unpack, are my turn-ons serving me, and are my turn-ons authentic to me?
Yeah.
It's really important to be discerning, and I like to use the question, what are my choices wiring me for? Ooh. So if my turn-ons are wiring me for more of what I want, more of how I want to show up in my partnership, in my relationship, in sex with folks, then amazing. Yeah. If my turn-ons are actually making me feel less than, if they're preventing me from showing up in integrity and taking me further away from where I want to be, then that might warrant a little bit of inquiry. So it's not about, moral imperatives. It's about, how am I using my sexual choices to get me closer to being the person I want to be?
Wow. That question again, let's just say that. How am I using my sexual choices to get closer to the person I want to be?
Mm.
That's a pretty big question.
Yeah, right. And we don't have these questions. No one's asking us when we're growing up, like, does your partner care about your pleasure? Right? How do you know they care about your pleasure?
What is pleasure?
Right? Yeah.
I mean, really, I just, now that you brought that up, I'm curious what like experience you had growing up with sex and sex education, because I had, I guess, pretty good comprehensive sex education in high school and didn't realize that that was uncommon until getting to college and talking to other people and their experiences, and me being like, yeah, our health teacher rolled a condom down her arm and said, don't let anybody tell you they're too big. This is how big they stretch. And I was like, your health teacher didn't do that? Like, that's not normal. And they're like, you got to see condoms? I was like, yeah, wait, what? So I'm curious now that you do this work, like where, you know, what was that like for you growing up? This podcast is sponsored by TerraSeed. TerraSeed is on a mission to disrupt the vitamin industry, empower vegans, and reduce plastic waste in the world. They put everything plant-based people struggle to get in an all-inclusive, vegan, compostable package multivitamin that replenishes them and our planet every single day. Seriously, y'all, win, win, win. Even if you're not vegan, this vitamin will help you get those key nutrients that you need. I am so excited to share a discount code for your first purchase. Use code CARLY50 at checkout to get 50% off. Again, that's CARLY50 for 50% off your first purchase at terraseed.com. Don't forget this code so they know I sent you. This podcast is supported by showThanks. Thinks are washable, reusable period underwear. They look and feel just like normal underwear, but better. Every pair of Thinks is made with their signature innovative technology for the ultimate period protection. Their breathable products are safely made with cotton, nylon, and elastin for a little stretch. I am seriously obsessed with my Thinks underwear. They have changed my periods. Try them yourself or get someone the best gift ever with a sweet little discount code. Go to shewthinks.com/Carly for $10 off your order today. Again, that's shewthinks.com/CARLY for $10 off your order. Try Thinks today.
Interesting. So, I came from a Catholic upbringing, but I went to school where there was sex ed. So It wasn't a Catholic school. I didn't have I love the like condom down the arm because it communicates two things: A, protection, but B, that issue of consent and manipulation that can happen. And I mean, like, guys are just doing what they're being taught to do by other guys, by pornography, by the videos and movie content that they watch. So conditioning works in both ways. So I didn't have that message, but I did. My one block of sex ed that I remember was my PE teacher starting the block, putting a condom on a banana, and ending the block with spermicidal foam just everywhere.
Oh my God. Oh, that escalated quickly.
He was trying to show us how to like load it up, and it just like...
And you'll never forget it. Ever will you forget that. Spermicidal foam everywhere feels like the title of something. I'm not sure what yet, but it feels like the title of something.
It should be. So I did have some sex ed, but it was all based on preventing young women from getting pregnant. Right. There was no communication around consent. It was just very like, whatever you do, don't get knocked up. So yeah, I mean, I grew up too in the time of, my parents were very, children should be seen and not heard.
Got it.
And I didn't get really any relationship advice. growing up. So yeah, I had to really figure it out on my own. And we didn't have, social media back then with all these like lovely carousels of, this is consent. This is what consent doesn't look like. Right. So on the one hand, the kids growing up in high school right now, they do have access to all this information online, but they also have so many more pressures than we did. And I wonder sometimes if my whole authentic sexuality spiel comes from the fact that I really did get to take my time. I have a pretty extensive abuse history from when I was younger, and I went to my life was very sheltered when I was in high school. And I think I was 20 before I had sex for the first time, 21 before I had my first boyfriend. And because of some of the dynamics in my family, there weren't expectations for me to really like meet any kind of standards.
Yeah.
They didn't really, they kind of had these like really high expectations that they didn't really expect me to live up to. So in a way,
I guess
it was sort of this weird balance of like, okay, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
Anyway, so as a result, I really got to take my time and I didn't feel pressured to explore or to have boyfriends or to, do things before I was ready. And that I know is really rare. I chose to lose my virginity with a friend. It was like completely, he didn't know that it was happening, but he didn't know that I was losing my virginity with him. He knew that we were having sex. There was consent there, but it was unlike a lot of us, like, I'm really grateful that I got to have that experience and be like completely in control of that first experience. They didn't all follow that same, trend, but at least in the beginning, it felt spacious. Let's just say that. I felt like I had a lot of space around my development. So
isn't that a gift?
Yeah, it is. Parental neglect, really good thing.
There's positives, I guess, that come out of it. Not that was a gift, but the fact that you had space is quite lovely. And you 100%. Bring up social media, and so I'm 29, and I feel like the last age group that didn't have social media in school.
Yes.
Because Facebook was just becoming a thing when I was in high school. And I mean, I think I had one, and we would write back and forth on people's walls, but it was just people I was going to see the next day and be like, see you at softball practice. And like, that was it. It was a glorified MySpace at that time. And so I didn't ever feel pressure. I didn't care about pictures on there really. I mean, that was it. That was the only thing I can really think of, and like instant message. And I would be staying up really late with the lights off and doing one letter at a time so my mom wouldn't hear the keyboard chatting boys, but she always did somehow because she's a mom. But I feel like now, I actually said the other day, and it makes me feel like old now that I'm saying this, but I'm like, I'm so glad that I grew up when I did in terms of coming to age, because knowing myself back then, I think that could have really crumbled me. I think that really could have been detrimental to my sense of self. I have a pretty strong sense of self. And I think that would have been really hard for that to exist. Instagram and TikTok and name it. I don't know. There's probably 7,000 I'm not even aware of, but I like at this point, I'm like, sure. Yeah. that app. But how is social media influencing this conversation? Because there are so many positives and there are so many negatives.
Yeah. So will we focus on sort of young people, or do you want to open it up to, I'll cover the gamut.
Yeah, cover the gamut, because I'm kind of curious about both.
So I want to be very careful about the words I choose.
That's okay. Take your time. I understand.
So sex positivity is a wonderful thing. Right, and there are so many shame-filled acts and practices and preferences that people haven't been allowed to explore and honor in themselves because of the sexual repression of our world.
Yeah.
As we dispel shame for all of those acts and practices and preferences, we have to be very careful to not create a culture of coercion for everyone for whom that isn't part of what they want to experience.
Yeah.
Right. So one example that I use, because this is young couples, say like late teens, who are just having their first experiences of sexual relationships. There's a lot of experimentation happening, and young guys are using women's bodies, not because they're malicious and they're horrible, but because of they're reenacting what they see on pornography.
Yeah.
There's a lot of experimentation using women's bodies as sort of laboratories of what's going to happen.
Yes.
So
I've experienced that. Yes.
Yeah. Right. So, I've heard stories of girls ending up in, hospitals needing medical attention because something was stuck somewhere where it shouldn't be.
Oh my God.
Or, right. And, this is all like, hey, let's try this. This would be cool.
And then probably this is where the fawning conversation comes in.
And, girls love their boyfriends and they want to participate, and everybody else is doing it.
They want to be a cool girl.
Exactly. So this is why I really am trying to insert the fawning awareness into our conversations around sex positivity as a, tool of harm reduction. So it's not about saying, don't do anal. It's like, how are we now making anal the new bar or whatever,
whatever
the
it is,
new bar that these young girls have to reach in order to be acceptable to their partners. So there's a lot of research that's been done around, and again, like pardon my heteronormativity, but this was, the study was around women and boys and male-female pairs. Young girls are completely aware of the pornography that their male counterparts are watching, and they have, by the time they're, reaching 13, 14, they have anxiety about what they're going to be expected to do with their partners. And the various different dangerous things that they know that they're watching, and then expecting them to play out. So, the fear is real and our concerns are legitimate. So in terms of how social media is playing out, we really just have to be careful about the messaging that we're sending to young people, especially. A 30, 40-year-old person can discern for themselves. They've had, maybe 10, 20 years of serious relationships to be able to go on, but young folks are at risk because we have this increase in intensity in what's being seen in pornography, and we have more media to show. Like, that didn't exist when I was growing up. Like, you couldn't, I don't know, like there was Playboy. Right, there were magazines,
but people just read it for the articles. Come on.
Totally. But to your point of not growing up with social media, there was no access to, there was no RedTube, there was no, whatever the other one is, Pornhub. And there was also no awareness of ethical pornography. So we're really in this time where I feel like we're kind of scrambling to get this information of safety out there as fast as all the other potentially harmful content is being funneled into these young people's brains.
Wow. It's one of those things where sometimes I look at things that young people that I know in my life are posting, and I'm like, okay, I'm not so scared for the future. These young women are badass.
They really are.
They know who they are on a whole different level. They're expressing themselves. And then you see that flip side of the coin where you're like, oh my gosh, is this them? Is part of this them? Or are they fawning? Now, not to keep using that term, but it really does describe what's happening. So it's Yeah, it's hard to, and the weird thing is that we're kind of in the midst of figuring out what does that do to people long term.
Yes.
I mean, we don't totally know yet.
No, it's still very new.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that social media is designed to be addictive. So it's triggering our addiction pathways and basically activating our nervous systems. It's rewiring billions of people's of human nervous systems every day. So, it's more important than ever to be really discerning around our social media and computer practices. So,
yeah,
but that's hard to explain to young kids who've been grown up with social media from the time they, came out of the womb. So, yeah.
I teach yoga to 4th and 5th graders and a bunch of different grades at different schools in the area. And I walked into, and it's a small town and I grew up here. So, I mean, that's just one thing, but I walked into the gym and it was 5th graders that day. And one girl was like, I know you, I've seen you on Facebook. You're Consciously Carly. And it was just like, she's 5th grade. And I was just like, oh God, what do I post on there? Like, I'm not posting anything I'm embarrassed of, but I'm like, what am I posting for this 5th grader that is now seeing me as her yoga teacher? And I ultimately was like, well, that's the internet. That's what open business pages are. There's no turning back now, but I was like 5th grade. I felt so old being like, how old are you? You have a Facebook account? And she was just looking at me like, okay, grandma. But it was wild to me.
Yeah.
It was wild.
It's so hard because it's not going away.
Right.
But I mean, more and more research is coming out every year about the effects of technology on our relationships. And it's interesting. I think there was a great article, I think it was in the New Yorker, and it was talking about this research that was done on young people, 5th graders, kids who were tweens and early teens, who were begging their tech-addled parents for emotional connection, who were actually acknowledging themselves because it was a need that they were having that wasn't being fulfilled by, their 40, 50-year-old parents who had, been like BlackBerry warriors in the 90s, right? So
BlackBerry warriors.
God, Blackberries, geez. Anyway, yeah. So I think that there are more and more people who are drawing their attention to it, and it is obviously something that tech companies and apps need to be mindful of because they're affecting the health and well-being of the global population.
Yeah, of generations.
Yes.
Wild.
Yes,
so
totally.
We're in the midst of a pandemic. There is no beating around that bush. And I imagine that, or I don't know, maybe I'm making an assumption here, that has changed the landscape of what you're talking about with people. And, there was like the first year, there was jokes about, people having babies and people were going to get home. Although the only people I saw having children were people that didn't already have children. I think the ones that already did were like, no, we're good. We're stuck at home with them. But how is the last 2 years changed the conversation around intimacy and relationships? Like, what has that done for us?
Oh my goodness. We could have a show on this alone. Well, to start, we can talk about the effect of lockdowns on people who are already in relationships. We saw a lot of breakups.
Yeah.
A lot of increase in domestic violence.
Yes.
Huge increase in domestic violence. It doubled in Canada.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. As did the severity of the injuries. There in the UK, there were people blaming COVID for killing their partners. Yeah, like it's the pandemic. There's the UN has called it the shadow pandemic, and they've identified it as, they're calling it a legitimate human rights crisis, the violence against women, like widespread violence against women across the globe. So that's kind of one of the most physically and obviously damaging effects of the pandemic, is the increase in And not just domestic, but like physical violence, but emotional as well. You know, everyone was locked down, people were stuck together, and any kind of lingering or unaddressed issues just, you know, became impossible to ignore. So clearly there were folks that broke up as a result of that, but some are still in those entanglements.
Right.
And so I really feel for that, because having been in an abusive relationship myself and struggling to get out, I can't imagine what it would have been like to try and get out in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
So that's probably the first effect of the pandemic on intimacy and sex. The other piece is the fact that the pandemic's really changed our relationship to our bodies. We are not in our pleasure bodies. We're in our stress bodies.
Yes.
And we need to be in our pleasure bodies to be able to connect with one another, to be able to have really lovely eye contact, to be able to read one another's emotional state. So it's harder for folks to connect on that, you know, subconscious physiological level. But B, there's all the fears of kissing someone again. You know, if you're single, it's like, oh my gosh, you have cooties.
Yes, like, seriously.
And it's not like, it's not imagined.
It's so weird. I had a friend who was going to go to New York, and I was like, ooh, are you going to maybe meet anyone? And I was like, oh,
yeah,
are you going to meet anyone at the bar? Or no, I don't know. This is weird now.
Yeah, it's completely changed, you know, courtship practices. I mean, some people are still out, you know, hooking up and, you know, being safe with being
your vax card
and whatever. But I think even for people who are vaccinated, there's this fear, you know, because people who are vaccinated can still get COVID. So
there's a lot of probably a lot of internalized fear then around I'm just guessing here. Do you totally correct me? But what you said that I was like, wait, we're taking in all this fear around relationships, and that fear is probably sticking in our brains around sex and intimacy in a new way. So we're going to be fearful of that and connect that in our brain.
And on like an unconscious body level. So when we wire stress responses to our arousal systems, we, you know, again, we're wiring ourselves for more of the same. So it's more important than ever to be connecting to our authentic arousal and be really coming from a place of being grounded and regulated, which is not easy to do in this time.
Wow. There's a lot there, like you said, that could be a whole show in and of itself, because there's a lot to unpack there, but I am weighing I'm like, okay, maybe not so many questions, but maybe part two, maybe a part two someday on just this or something, because I think there's a lot to go into there, because there maybe can be some, I don't know, I'm just an optimist at heart, just a little Pisces that wants everyone to be happy and healthy, and I'm like, what can we get from this? What will we gain in our sex and intimate relationships because of this time? And I don't know that.
I can answer that for you.
Please do.
We gain better communication skills.
Yes.
We're having conversations that we never would have had before, way early on in the game.
Yeah.
We're getting to we're getting to like the things that we'd wait for like 10 or 20 dates for. We're like, okay, so let's get on this.
That's so true.
So I do see, like, as harmful and upsetting and, you know, destructive to our way of life that the pandemic has been, there have been some really wonderful effects to it, namely this conversation around, you know, you're going to put yourself in my body, and whether, you know, that maybe it takes a virus in order for us to get there, but really I see that this COVID is actually helping us have more conversations around consent.
Interesting.
So I mean, in terms of dating, yes, it slows things down. Yes, it makes us more fearful, but I think that it also teaches us more about ourselves and more about our needs, more about our standards and boundaries. So it's a huge, you know, growth initiative, but the the other piece, there was something else I was going to, oh yeah. The thing that I share with people who are feeling really tentative about re-entering the dating space is to use this time to gift yourself an experience of intentional celibacy. So maybe you take 6 months and you just deep dive into your own pleasure and you explore certain practices, certain tools. I have in the book, I should say, so the book approaches this whole issue from identify the issue, get to the underlying pieces, and then let's have some tools that we can use.
Nice.
So one of the tools that I talk about in the book is intentional celibacy. And there are some structures that people can use for approaching that. When I first dove into those waters, I didn't have any framework. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just not having sex.
Right.
And it took me a while to actually be like, okay, well, what am I actually doing here? What do I want to learn about myself? What do I want to learn about other people? How can I bring my best self into the bedroom and ensure that I have mutually beneficial, intimate experiences?
Right.
So it's really, when you take it away and just say, I'm shutting the door to dating and focusing on what my relationship to sex and intimacy is. It's unreal what comes up, because again, no one gave us that opportunity. When I was like 18 or 16, I didn't get sat down and be like, so you are a sexual being and you get to evolve in whatever way, at whatever pace that you want to. Here are some things you can try. Here are some things you cannot try.
Damn, that would have been nice.
Right? I think sometimes a lot of my work that I do, I'm really like trying to reparent my.
I was just going to say you're reparenting.
Yeah, totally. Around sex, which none of us got.
Yeah.
None of us got that sort of really loving, gentle, you are a sexual being and you have a sexuality and it's beautiful, whatever it is, kind of conversation. So yes.
Wow. Wow. So is there anything that you want to share or talk about that I didn't give you space to, that you think would be important for listeners right now? It's not a trick question.
No, I know. I'm just trying to think. I feel like we covered a lot of really great ground. I guess the only thing that we didn't mention was that fawning is something that we learn when we're really young. And just the same way as so it's pretty, widely accepted that our early attachment experiences, our attachment experience with our parents, color or inform the experiences that we have in relationships, romantic relationships. Yep. They affect how we choose our partners, how we respond to closeness and space.
Yeah.
But what we don't often look at is the way those attachment experiences affect us in the bedroom. And we don't want to, because it's icky to think that your parents had anything to do with who you are, in bed.
Icky is the right word.
Right. But the thing we have to understand about pleasure is that our, pleasure is not, so I don't have a different nervous system for processing sexual pleasure versus processing non-sexual or sensual pleasure. Right. It's one spectrum.
Right.
And my first experiences of pleasure happened when I was the moment I was born and I was being held by someone. I was safe. I had someone, with loving tones of voice, communicating how much they loved me.
Yeah.
And even if you say we're adopted or were born prematurely, there was touch, there were people caring for you and proving to you that you weren't dying, the world wasn't ending, that everything was going to be okay. So those early attachment experiences totally affect how we relate to pleasure for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
And, obviously as well in the bedroom. So that's, I think, the only piece that we didn't touch on is that's very important, is how our early attachment experiences are affecting how we approach sex and intimacy.
Which totally circles back to this idea of reparenting with the people that you're working with and ourselves around sex and intimacy.
Yeah.
Where can people get a hold of you or find the book or follow along? Because I know people are going to be like, I want more.
So my Instagram is Nischa Phair, Nischaphair. The book you can find there or on my website, nischaphair.com. The e-version is currently available now. By the time this airs, might have, you said 2 weeks?
With it somewhere in January, let's say.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It might be on Amazon by then.
Okay.
Sort of putting the final touches on that, but I can give you all the links for the show notes. So
awesome. That would be great. Thank you so much for joining
Thank
and
you.
being here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Consciously Clueless. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. If that's somewhere like Apple Podcasts, leave a review and you could be read on air as the review of the week. Looking for more podcast content, yoga videos, meditations, and all-around amazing community? Head over to patreon.com/consciouslycarly and check out what's going on. And finally, if you are ready to make changes in your life but don't really know where to begin, let's work together. Head over to consciouslycarly.com and we can start the process and get you happy. Until next time.